Hello, everybody. This is Jay Frost speaking, and it's time for another in the series of the 2018 Flash Classes brought to you by DonorSearch, as you see right there on the screen. And yes, I am Jay Frost, but definitely not the star of the show. We have two incredible presenters back today, and I am going to introduce them anew in case you have not met them before, and you will want to definitely record their information at the end. They'll be great colleagues for you to have in the future. But before that, I also want to introduce you to this platform. So I'm going to take a couple of minutes to do so that you can fully participate in what is before you today. So with that, let me jump into what today's Flash class is. And that is burnout. If you're feeling it, you've come to the right place. And if you're not feeling it yet, you still come to the right place, because inevitably it will meet you on your professional road, either you or your colleagues. And so we have today, again, Scott Koskoski and Shelley Prevost from Crouch & Associates talking to you about personal and professional burnout, what it looks like, how it affects us, and of course, and most importantly, how to avoid it. It's from both their fundraising experience perspective and a clinical perspective, and you'll learn more about why they are so well positioned to tell you about that in just a second. Now, we do want to make sure that you can completely immerse yourself in this and ask questions. Of course, your mics are not active, as you may know from attending other webinars, and that's true here too. We want to make sure there's no ambient sound interrupting the flow of the presentation, so your mics are silenced. But we want you to make sure to ask any question or make any comment at any time, and I'll provide those to the presenters at the conclusion of the presentation. And to do that, you simply want to follow the bouncing arrow, go over to the questions tab on your GoToWebinar control panel and enter questions at any time. Really do take advantage of this. Don't wait until the end. We want to make sure that your questions are queued up and they can answer them as they finish their presentation. Now, you can also get copies of both the slides and the recording today. So if you are interested in being able to share these slides, you'll have contact information for the presenters. We'll also have them at DonorSearch, but it's great to be able to reach right out to the presenters and talk to them. So you'll have those slides, but much of what they will be presented off the cuff. So you do want to have access to the recording, and that will be easy to do. You simply go to the DonorSearch.net site. Again, that's DonorSearch.net, and you look at the Resources tab. You can see that right there at the point of the arrow. And if you click that, it'll pull down this menu of options, including the third one, recorded videos. And if you were to click that, you'd have a list of all the recorded videos that are there to date. And I think almost all, perhaps there have been only 2 Flash classes that were not recorded. So you'll see plenty of content from last year, a little bit from 2016, and a lot already in this new year. So do take a look for that and share this with those people who are looking like they need a nap before they totally burn out and then are of no use to themselves or you. This will be a session that you can definitely return to time and time again. It's very much evergreen in our field. Our presenters, we have back today Scott Koskoski and Shelley Prevost, and I'll just tell you a little bit about them. You can learn more about them on the Crouch & Associates website. or even their LinkedIn profiles, which are both pretty interesting. But we'll start with Scott, who has been, who is currently, of course, a regional director and performance consultant. In fact, they both serve in that type of role at Crouch and Associates. He previously was the Senior Philanthropy Advisor and Director of Philanthropy at the Morris Animal Foundation. And prior to that, he was at 6 different higher ed institutions in leadership development roles. So he brings a lot of experience to this, and especially through that lens that Crouch and Associates offers of looking at performance of people in our field. Shelley Prevost, or I could even call her Dr. Shelley Prevost, is a PhD in psychology, and it's also regional director and performance consultant at Crouch and Associates. Previously, she was general partner at the Jump Fund, which is a women's capital investment firm, co-founder and CEO at Torch, and partner and director, this is my favorite, and director of happiness at the Lamppost Group. That's my favorite title of all. So we have both these folks here today to present on this really important topic. And if you'll bear with us, what I'm going to do is turn the tables over and let Shelley present. That will take us just 1 second to do as I give her the con, so to speak. In fact, I may let you do that, Ryan, because I'm not seeing Shelley's name pop right up.
You all see, there we go. Hey, everybody. Success. Oh no, can you see my screen?
Apologize, folks. Ryan, would you do that again, please? There we go. It looks like it's going to pop up now.
There we go. I told you all before, I usually have some technical difficulties, so I'm glad we're here. Jake, are you ready for me to jump on in?
Please go right ahead.
Hello, everybody out there in webinar land. I am really excited. Scott and I both are really overjoyed to be with you talking about this topic. As Jay mentioned, Scott comes from a long line of experience in the fundraising world, and I come from psychology world. So the two of us together will have a lot to talk about on this topic. My hope is that you all can use this hour to pause and to reflect, because what I'm going to do, what we're going to talk about is really more of the psycho, I would even dare say spiritual components of burnout. We know a lot of the physical elements of it, but what I want to do is kind of peel back the layers a little bit and look at what's underneath, what beliefs are underneath these behaviors that support our burnout. So we're going to launch into it. I'm going to present some information, and at the very end, I'm going to do a little interview with Scott, and he's going to have a lot more to talk about from the fundraising side of things and how that leads to burnout. So first, I want to give you a little bit of my my story of burnout. So this was me probably a year and a half or so ago, in the smack dab middle of my burnout experience. And I look like literally I could fall over and go to sleep in this picture. This was, we're on vacation. My husband snapped this picture of me, and I looked at it and I was like, oh my goodness, yeah, this is bad. And in the middle of this burnout episode I was going through, we decided to rent an RV and travel 3,500 miles across the country, which I do not recommend if you're in the middle of burnout doing that, that kind of trip. Not a good idea. So here's real quick my story of burnout. As Jay mentioned, I was the director of happiness at a venture capital firm starting in 2010. So I was brought in to work with kind of the people problems of starting a company. Did that work, loved that work, did it for several years. And then one of my partners at this venture firm decided to start his own company. He kind of caught the entrepreneurial bug, and he was going to our other partners at this investment firm to ask for capital for investment. They came to me and said, we're not going to invest in this company. We think it's a great idea, but we're not going to invest unless you're a part of it. We need the psychological kind of pieces of starting a company. You guys really need to focus on that. So my ego loved that. Didn't know the first thing about starting a tech company, but I was in. I was like, yep, sign me up. Let's do it. For the first year, we had a really successful go of it. We raised a lot of money, built a product. We launched a Kickstarter campaign and did that successfully. About a year in, though, my partner that I had co-founded this company with decided that he was going to leave the company. So I inherited he was the operation and technical side of the company, and I was the CEO charged with the PR and communication and being the face of the company. So I inherited a lot of skill sets that I was not naturally gifted at. For 2 years, I just was grinding to figure out exactly how to lead this tech company. I wasn't sleeping. I was working 70, 80 hours a week. I would, go to bed at 10:30. By 2:30 in the morning, I would be awake. You lay in bed for 2 hours and you're finally like, I just might as well get up. I did that for about a year. Was eating terribly. The stress was more than I could possibly imagine. And all of that culminated into a breakdown last Thanksgiving, where I just woke up out of bed. I couldn't walk. My husband's like, what's going on with you? I started sobbing, and it's just, the awareness that 2 years of this type of behavior had finally caught up with me. And it was at that moment that I realized I can't keep this up. I didn't know it was burnout at the time, but that's certainly what was happening. And I was going through a lot of despair and just disengagement and wanted to get away from it all. And there's a quote that really stuck out to me and rang true for me at that time. And it's a quote by Parker Palmer, who's an activist and a scholar. And I'll talk about him a lot through this program, through this webinar. But he says this, he says, burnout isn't about giving too much. It's about giving what you don't possess. And that was certainly true for me. I was giving out of what I didn't have to give. And I really think so many of our well-meaning intentions come from this fake ethic of oughts and shoulds, have tos, but they really are very little to do with being in sync with our own innate talents and our own strengths and capacities. When you give what grows in you, you don't get burnt out because it replenishes itself. Your output is replenished because it's sourced from your natural giftedness. True for me, and I think sadly for a lot of us, we don't ever really give ourselves the time to stop and ask, is my work replenishing me? Am I giving out of what's growing? Or am I giving out of some, fake ethic of oughts and shoulds? Let's talk just for a minute about some of these signs of burnout, these symptoms. And my hunch is that if you're on this call, you probably have some experience with these symptoms. I think every person listening has kind of their cocktail of burnout symptoms. For me, the most pervasive by far was fatigue, caused by a lot of insomnia. There was physical pain. And I also had this combination of anxiety and depression. Not many people saw these symptoms, and I think I even denied them in myself. And for me, I wouldn't let myself sit idle for too long. If I started to kind of come down or feel weak, I would just armor up and power through and keep going. And I think that's unfortunately what a lot of us do. So I'm asked quite a bit, what's the difference between stress and burnout? Like, how do these actually look different? So, here's what I'll say. Chronic stress is the pathway to burnout. So normal stress, the normal physiological response to stress. So there's a triggering event, something stresses us out. It kind of elicits all these stress hormones in your body to get the job done. You deal with it and you move on. And that's natural and normal and good. But with chronic stress, so if you're in this environment that you're giving out of what you don't have to give, it's relentless, and over time it will lead to just a host of physical and emotional wear and tear. And one of those is burnout. So stress, it leads to overactivity, and burnout looks a little bit more like depression. And it's interesting that studies recently are finding that depression and burnout actually have more and more overlap. So like depression, burnout looks like exhaustion, but unlike depression, it also has this element of cynicism and just an ineffectiveness, that you just feel completely ineffective in your work. So this is what's interesting to me. Intellectually, we know what to do to avoid burnout. If I asked each of you all one by one, I think we would all know I have to eat better. I need to exercise. I need to be sleeping more. I need to meditate or spend time with my family. Yet we don't do these things. Why? Why do we not do these things? So as a psychologist, I'm much more interested in the beliefs that kind of support the behaviors that lead to burnout. So, and I think, there's 4 main ones in my work on myself, but also entrepreneurs that I've worked with, and now these, a lot of nonprofit executives. These are the ones that I see, kind of time and time again. So number 1 is we're trying to give what we do not possess, which is what I've already talked about. If you live your life with this laundry list of oughts and shoulds, I really believe that you begin to live the script for someone else's life. So if you're giving what does not naturally grow in you, it will eventually give out. Number 2, we have poor boundaries, a real inability to say no. And I think in our culture, what that looks like a lot is that we just take on too much. And again, I think this question of why do I take on too much? For many of us, I see this a lot, and I see this in myself. It's about this external validation that we need to feel good, to feel like we want people to see us as competent, or, she's really committed, or he's really creative. Whatever the fear is that we're afraid people will think of us or see in us is really what drives us to maintain these pretty poor boundaries with others. Number 3, this is a fun one. We feel shame around self-care. I hear this a lot. People don't use the word shame, but they just don't want to take care of themselves. And I think for women, women on this call will certainly understand and see this not only in themselves, but their friend groups and colleagues. So this comes a lot from the scripts that we're taught as children and growing up. For example, I come from a long line of matriarchs who are doers. So my grandmother, my mother, my sister, my aunts, like women that just are doing constantly. Self-care for them was like a crock pot meal. So these women are, 6 hours volunteering at school, and then they would mow the lawn, and then they would sew a dress, all kinds of things. And then self-care meant I'm going to cook my 5-course meal in a crock pot tonight, which, I just never saw them take care of themselves. That was just not something you did. I saw a bunch of doers who didn't come down, and they never seemed weak, like they had to take care of themselves. So that's still a belief that I'm working really hard to challenge in myself. Number 4, and this is the one, our self-worth is attached to overactivity. So I want to dig into this one a little bit more, because I think this one is huge. I will tell you all, most of us are card-carrying members of the cult of overactivity. So I want to read a quote for you. A little bit's on your screen right now, but I'm going to read the quote in its entirety. And this is a quote by Thomas Merton. Many of you will know him, a monk, scholar, author, activist, who's just done some profound work that's really influenced me. So he says, there is a pervasive form of contemporary violence to which the idealist most easily succumbs: activism and overwork. The rush and pressure of modern life are a form, perhaps the most common form, of its innate violence. To allow oneself to be carried away by a multitude of conflicting concerns, to surrender to too many demands, to commit oneself to too many projects, to want to help everyone and everything, is to succumb to violence. The frenzy of our activism neutralizes our work for peace. It destroys our own inner capacity for peace. It destroys the fruitfulness of our own work because it kills the root of inner wisdom, which makes work fruitful. And the fact that we work in nonprofits, we have these wonderful mission-driven organizations that we're a part of, inherently means we jump in the deep end time and time and time again. So I think what Merton is asking us to do is to really pause, to stop and think about and reflect on our work. And the inner violence we do to ourselves neutralizes the effect of our work. I hope you all can see this cute cartoon here. We forget we are human beings, not human doings. This is the violence of the overworking. What drives this overactivity? I think that's a question we don't often stop and ask ourselves. Here's what I think. I think it's some combination of ego and fear. It's fear of not only our unworthiness. So, for example, I'm nothing if I'm not doing. But I think ultimately it's a fear of an annihilation. And I think this might be the worst fear of all. I think that this is the core of burnout. There's a saying we say, I'll sleep when I die. I think that is so reflective of our toxic concept of this overactivity. This, if I'm not overworking myself, then I'll die. This kind of fear that we have, it also says, if I feel so unworthy that if I'm not doing, and that's if I never existed at all. And I think it goes back to that idea of sleeping when I die. And I think this is what ultimately it leads to, this disengagement and despair and burnout. And so what I see, to avoid all of this mess completely, what we do is we pick up the sword, we armor up, we attach personal worth to all that we're accomplishing. And we all know this is true. There's a cost to our life and to our relationships, but also to our work. And I think that's what Thomas Merton's talking about. So the question is, to go back to his quote, what do you need to do right now to tend to the root of inner wisdom that makes your work fruitful? So I hope that you all can think about that for a minute. So in our society, these are just kind of the main psychological functions of the way that we are in the world. I say these are the main tools that we use to kind of whack away at the world. But when you're in burnout, and for those of you all that have been in this place, you know that these faculties don't work as well anymore. So I think what you have to do is really figure out what's driving that behavior, and you let you go deeper. I'm going to go back. There it is. There is a quote. I did not want to miss this quote. This great quote by Theodore Redke. He says, "In a dark time, the eye begins to see." I love this quote. And so there is a giftedness in burnout. If you can really kind of stop and see it, it's calling you to recalibrate. So here's the question. What's it calling you to recalibrate exactly? Like, what's going on in your life that you need to pay attention to this? Really, how do we find our way out of burnout? So these are not researched. These are my own kind of reflections in myself and in the work that I've done with people. But I really think that these are these 5 elements or the things that burnout's calling you to take a look at. So the first one's community. And here's my definition. My definition of community is it's a group of what I call fellow sojourners. So these are traveling companions that kind of go through life with you. They offer you non-judgment, positive regard. They offer you honest challenge and psychological intimacy. This is kind of your circle of trust, if you think about it that way. If we're lucky, we have this in our families, our neighbors, faith groups, work. Those would be great places to have it. What I know is that we are social animals. So I know that we're hardwired for connection. And a lot of psychologists have studied this and researched this, reported this, that literally without contact and connection and community, we would die. So we need each other for our survival, but we also, the beauty of community is it shoulders each other's burdens, and we allow each other to do some fact checking, some reality checking. I can get so caught in my own thoughts and my own process that I need people around me that I trust that poke holes in that sometimes and really challenge that and help me do some of that reality checking. So the next one's solitude, and I would also I would use silence with this as well. So solitude and silence. You all know this. We live in a society that does not value solitude or silence. It values action. But I'm here to tell you, y'all, I think living without silence and this a level of solitude, it is really dangerous. And I'm proof of that. Without it, you end up believing that your ego and all it wants is your purpose, that that's what you're supposed to be doing. If you live a life where ego's in charge, you're left with burnout. And I think also a burning question. And I've asked myself this, I have a great life. Why am I not fulfilled? What is missing? And it's solitude that muffles this noise. And it creates a space for authenticity to surface. In solitude and in the silence, you can ask yourself questions about, like, how is my life going? How is my work really going? And you can pause to wait for an answer. I think it's the solitude that gives the data of our life time to converge into some insights. The next one, self-compassion and self-care. These two also, they are inextricably connected. Instead of judgment, which is often this voice inside of us, self-compassion is this internal monologue of self-kindness that results in, and I think is the fuel for, more practices in self-care. So if you get a massage every month, but you flagellate yourself for sounding like an idiot in that last presentation, you are not practicing self-care. So what I would urge you is pay more attention to your inner dialogue, especially when things are not going well or as you would like them to go. The next one is authenticity. For me, this is a simple idea of showing up in the world as your true self. And this concept of true self is very old. It goes back probably millennia, really. But I first heard about it from D.W. Winnicott, who was a psychologist working with children. He characterized the true self as this spontaneous, at peace, creative, accepting way that we can live and move and work in the world. And I think if you show up this way most of the time, you're going to be more in tune with your natural self and your own inclinations, and less likely to be seduced by this cult of overactivity, of people pleasing, or letting those feelings of unworthiness plague you that they so often do in burnout. And the last one is this concept of surrender. And I'll tell you all, so every year I pick a word. It's kind of my mantra. This year my word is service. I want to be in service to others. Last year my word was surrender. And I put it on a sticky note, and I put it next to my bathroom window or mirror. And it reminded me every day that what is something I need to let go of today that is no longer in service to me. And I remember sometimes it was something really small, like, okay, I'm not going to send an email at 4 a.m. Like, that's ridiculous. Let's not do that. And then recently it's been, I am going to let go of some toxic relationships in my life that I no longer need to be a part of. So I guess, that would be my question to you all. What is something large or small that it's time for you to let go of? So, and here's the last thing I really want to talk about is this idea of the tragic gap, and how this is really the remedy for avoiding burnout. And this idea of the tragic gap is kind of standing in the middle of what is the reality and what can be. It's holding the tension between those two things. There's an ambiguity that living between the possibility of our life and our work and how it is currently, that ambiguity creates so much uneasiness that we really start to clutch our ideals way too tightly. And clutching our ideals keeps pushing us forward to achieving more and more and more to make us feel better. But ultimately, it's the root of our burnout. And I would say is the root of our despair also. So I think if we can live in this tragic gap, if we can learn to occupy that space, then the likelihood for us not getting to burnout is going to be a lot greater. And I want to show you all about a 5-minute clip of Parker Palmer, who I mentioned earlier. He's the director at the Center for Courage and Renewal. I've read, if you haven't read his work, you need to. It's phenomenal. And he really does challenge us to go beyond kind of the surface of our lives and look a little bit deeper about what's motivating our behaviors. So what I want to do is show this video, and then I'll come back and we're going to have a little conversation with Scott.
Oh, Shelley, unfortunately, we're not able to hear the audio. Perhaps you could turn it up on your end.
Can you hear it now?
I don't believe so. Ryan, are you able to hear it?
I'm not hearing it on my end either.
Okay. Well, you know what? We'll send the link, and I'm going to pause that. I would love for, what we'll do is send the link in with the slides and some of the follow-up we do. because I really do think this is a valuable, and he says it a lot better than I could in terms of how the task of our life, and especially those of us doing the work that we do with nonprofits, requires us to live in this tragic gap. And if there's any remedy for burnout, it is learning how to do that. And so, but again, he says it a lot better than me. So we'll send the link. How's that? Is that good for y'all? So what I'm going to do right now is I would like to invite my colleague Scott in. Scott Koskoski. Are you there, Scott?
Hello, Shelley. Can you hear me?
I can. I'm going to turn you down a little bit. Yeah. So I've asked Scott to join me in talking about this topic from his own experience as of late with some burnout, and also to offer a little bit of a perspective from some of the unique challenges that fundraisers might experience with stress particular to their work and industry. And then I'm just going to ask him to share some of those experiences. So Scott, to start off, could you talk a little bit about, you've been doing fundraising for 20 something years now, I think. Mm-hmm. So talk a little bit about the unique stresses that you have experienced and how those might have crept up to lead to some burnout for you.
Well, thanks, Shelley, and it's great to be with DonorSearch Nation again this afternoon. I have been in ruts. I have fallen into routines consciously and subconsciously, and I have experienced burnout at various points in my career. And it's one of the reasons that I decided to pursue my current role as a coach and consultant, because I'm passionate about keeping fundraisers and keeping those who work in the nonprofit community passionate about what they do and in love with what they do. And I think there's many folks, including me at one point in time, who lost sight of why I fell in love with fundraising in the first place and why I fell in love with the nonprofit and social sector in the first place. But there are many of us who lose sight of the missions that we serve, who feel pressure to perform, to prove ourselves, to outdo ourselves, to impress a new boss, to do whatever it is that causes general burnout or acute or specific burnout. I'd be happy to share a bit more of my own story, but yeah. I know that we are in an environment, we work in a space in which no matter what we do, it never seems to be enough. There's always another mountain to climb. And those of us who work on the resource development side of things, who maybe aren't as connected with the program and the mission achievement side of things, sometimes lose our energy and lose our passion because we don't feel it, meaning the impact of our work, enough. And when you feel like, or where you're in a position in which you can't touch the end product and the end result, and you can't see that loop being closed with program, sometimes you start to wonder what you're doing and why you're doing it for.
So let me ask you this. So I have a belief that burnout is a slippery slope. So it starts with certain behaviors that we rationalize, or we excuse, or we just figure out a way to kind of sidestep. So what did that look like for you? Like that slippery slope? Can you tell us a little bit about the process of getting to burnout for you?
Yeah, I want to say two things to that. First is on the professional side. I was someone who achieved some fundraising success early in my career, and that led to a future opportunity, which led to another future opportunity, and eventually got to manage a team and work more closely with the upper leadership of the organization and then the next organization. And you fall into a trap, or at least I fell into a trap in which I kept trying to outdo myself. I kept trying to come up with the next trick, to come up with the gift that was even bigger than the last gift, or the commitment that was even more impressive, the process that was even more efficient or more effective. And when you fall into the trap of I've got to outdo myself, I've got to keep one-upping myself, it's not a very healthy place to be. What I learned too late, but I'm glad I learned. But what I learned was you don't need to impress at every turn. There's ultimately only two things that you can control, and that's your effort and your attitude. You can't worry about the reactions and the responses of others because you can't do anything to directly influence that. And so I got out of the game of trying to constantly impress and one up myself. The second thing to your question, Shelley, is I want to talk about self-care for a couple of seconds. The slippery slope that I fell down as a fundraiser was, well, sure, I have this goal of going to the gym, for example, 5 days a week, but there's this looming deadline at work, and 1 day out of 5, if I miss it, it'll be okay. Well, when you give yourself permission to eat away at your protected time and your personal time, the time that actually recharges you and energizes you to do the important work that you're hired to do, that is a slippery slope that can go all the way down very fast. And before I knew it, my 5 days a week in the gym were 1 day a week, and my commitment to eating healthy was, well, okay, but I'm stressed, so I'm going to stress eat, and I'll get back in the swing of things tomorrow. Well, tomorrow there's the donor dinner, and the donor wants a glass of wine, and we all know how that goes, and how just maintaining a diet as a fundraiser, particularly one who travels, can be very difficult. And then it's, well, I know I have a bedtime at 10:30, but I've really got to finish this, whatever it is. So I'll catch up on my sleep tomorrow, although tomorrow it's something else. And the slippery slope of self-care creates a revolving cycle that is really hard to climb out until you literally stop and manually reverse the cycle. But to me, it led to significant burnout.
Yeah, good. I'm gonna put you on the spot because I'm curious. You talked about the desire to kind of outdo yourself, and how I think we can kind of kick the can and never really get to the goalpost. So do you have an awareness of what was fueling that? Like, what were some of the beliefs that, like, what were you proving to yourself by outdoing yourself? Are you aware of that?
To me, it became not about proving to myself. As in the beginning, it was about proving to myself that, yes, I'm actually good at this thing called fundraising, or yes, I'm actually good at this thing called nonprofit management. But then it becomes about proving to other people, and it becomes about proving or impressing other people that you actually don't need to impress. that actually are impressed with you just by you being you, not by you doubling and tripling down on the concept of trying to impress them or others, which actually turns you into an artificial version of yourself that isn't really healthy for you or for anyone. But it's like the movie I just watched a couple of weeks ago with Tom Cruise. I think it's called American Made, where he's all about collecting wealth, and he can't be rich enough, and he's rich, but he's got to get richer, and he's got more money than anyone, but it's not enough. It's not enough. to me, when I felt myself in this serious phase of burnout, it wasn't about proving anything to myself. It was about this relentless and hopeless effort to prove to others that I could pull out another hat, pull out another rabbit out of the hat, that I had something bigger still to come, that I could raise one more zero in that gift. And when you stop and think about it, you ask yourself, why am I trying to prove anything to anybody?
Mm-hmm.
I'm chasing something that has no end.
Yeah, it reminds me of, well, two things. Graduate school, that work never ends. There's literally more you can read, more papers to write. And it also is startup. Like the work never ends. And I think as fundraising, what I'm learning about fundraising is it literally, you could work around the clock and still not get it all done.
I wanted to add
Yeah.
to that, Shelley. I wanted to multiply your really good point here. Once upon, at one point throughout my fundraising career, I became a leader of others. I had people in my charge, and I spent a number of years, leading other folks. I learned the damage that can be done when I didn't practice what I preached. I was great about preaching how to avoid burnout, about life work harmony. I don't believe in life work balance, but I believe in life work harmony.
Yeah.
And
I like that.
I was great about preaching it, and I still am. But I was terrible at practicing. And when you are good at saying something but not good at doing something, it doesn't matter what you say, Shelley. Folks follow what you do. And what you do, meaning if I'm burnout, and if I'm living a lifestyle that just exudes burnout, others fall in line, and they think that that is the expected or the norm behavior in this workplace culture or in my team. It doesn't matter what I say. They will. Folks generally follow what you do, not what you say. So be careful about matching your behaviors to your words.
Yeah, it reminds me of, the idea that the violence of overactivity is really, it is self-violence. It's the things that we do that really drive a slow death. Really, it's hastening death. It's chronic stress. There's a reason why they call it the silent killer. But I think also this violence to the self, when can be done to others, so we then project that out, especially to your point, when we're leaders of an organization, we then create cultures that create the conditions where burnout's supported instead of where it's challenged and held, and held the space for. So I think there's a lot of wisdom to what you're saying. One last question, and then I'd love to open it up to if there's others on the webinar that want to chime in. So I'm curious, given your experience, what kind of behaviors have you stopped doing to avoid getting to that burnout place? Or maybe what have you started doing?
It's a great question. I've started journaling. I used to chuckle when I used to, here I am in front of a national audience, admitting that I used to chuckle when I used to hear folks and friends talk about journaling a lot. And I would think, oh, that's something I would never do, or that's something I would never need to do. I've started cataloging moments in which I feel most energized and moments in which I feel less inspired and less and tired. And I'm looking for trends. I'm looking for themes. I'm looking for habits. Our time is the greatest gift that we are given. It is the greatest asset that we have. And it is a finite resource. And we all need to check ourselves once in a while and monitor how we are spending our time. So I've started very consciously understanding the allocation of my time and realizing how precious time is. There's 168 hours a week, and we work on average 40 of them. I guess those who are burnout might work more, but we We work about 40 of them. It's about 18 days a month. How are you spending it? You can start to tackle burnout if you are much more conscious about the cards that you hold in your hand, known as time, and how you deal those cards out to others, and how you hold cards for yourself. And I'd suggest anyone who may be on the teetering edge of burnout, start to catalog your time. And something I've stopped doing, I've stopped feeling bad about saying no to others. When I'm asked to serve on a board, I've turned down board memberships over the past 2 years that I wouldn't have turned down before, because I would have been flattered and honored, but not thinking so much about the impact on others, on myself, on my self-care, et cetera, et cetera. And at some point, everyone's plate is only so big, and there's a lot of opportunities out there in the world to put things on your plate, but you can't do it all. You can't do it all. You have value that is unique to you, and you need to leverage and maximize your value and your strengths. And that means you can't do everything. You have to say no, but you can't feel as bad about it.
That's right. Well, good. Thank you. Let's keep you on. Jay, if there are questions from the group, is this a good time to take some?
It's perfect, Shelley. Thank you both very much. You're generating a lot of really interesting conversation. Often with webinars, we'll have great questions. These are really probing. So I'm going to share some of these with you. And for those of you who don't get your questions answered, hopefully, Shelley, maybe, I don't know if you have a slide that has your contact information after this one with our.
I do, and it's not forwarding.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe one thing we can do is make sure to share that information with everyone. In fact, I can do that in the chat section. How would you, how would you prefer that people contact the two of you, or contact
email?
You?
Scott, are you good with email?
Yep, I'm posting our information right now on the chat screen, Jay.
Perfect. Okay. Yes, if you just do that to the entire audience, and everybody take a look in the chat section. But that's not to restrict you from asking questions. We do have a few more minutes, and they're willing to take them. So I'm going to just go ahead and give you a few of those now. The first one comes from Emily, who says, I work from a home office as a remote employee for my organization. How do you recommend setting boundaries when you literally live where you work?
We do that.
I'm still learning this, Emily, as I sit in here literally in my home office, and my dog is begging me for food right now. So this is a challenge. Scott, you've been working at your home for a lot longer than I have. And I mean, I'm learning that to be very intentional about boxing my time, especially if you're a parent, if you've got kids coming in and out, they know when the door's closed, mom's working. And I think there is a mental shift that has to happen too. So if you were literally to get in your car and go to an office, you're not by your laundry room, you know? So I think that there is kind of a mental boxing that has to happen. Scott, do you have any pointers? I'm still learning.
I think the door that does not have windows is most important. You know, I've got my home office just off of our hallway. I can hear children I've got 4 children under 10. So questioner, I feel your concern and your pain. And I know a lot of what's happening on the other side of the door. I'm often curious and tempted to go out there and be relational or put out a fire, but you have to teleport yourself into the world of serving others. And that means mental discipline. My kids and my spouse expect me to be working hard to provide for and take care of our family, and I expect them to be doing what they need to do as well. And so that door means a lot, but sometimes it's just not possible here, and I need to realize that I've got to pivot, and I've got to go out of the house to a Starbucks or something. But we at Crouch and Associates preach the concept of what's called a canopy space. And we can come into workplaces and teach you how to create a canopy space to provide for maximum focus and concentration. It is an area, physical space without distractions. Every 3 months, I spend a half day recreating a canopy space in my office, clearing out paperwork, organizing everything, even cleaning and dusting and vacuuming, and making sure that my workspace is as free as distractions as possible. And that's my canopy space here.
Emily, I would add one more thing too. I was just thinking about what I've realized, there's an acceptance that my schedule doesn't look like most people's schedule. So I don't work 9 to 5. Like I mean, there's a lot of weekend work. There's a lot of evenings. Sometimes I get up at 5 because I know that's the quiet space. And I know that I'm going to have to take off time to take my son to the orthodontist. And so the flexibility gives me the time and space to create the schedule that works for me. And I wish more and more organizations could endorse that and be willing to let their workers work that way. So hopefully those are helpful.
We have a comment here from Diane. I just want to read. What a great webinar. I can relate to everything that you're saying. Thank you for sharing your story so I can see myself in it and think about how I can change. We rarely get a chance to talk about this openly and honestly, so I really value that and just wanted to thank you both for having this conversation with us. I am grateful. It speaks to not just how that person's receiving what you're talking about here, but really to the kind of thing the kind of dynamic that you're talking about in the office with it, where people can be open with each other. And then, of course, that leads to a healthier environment. So I just found that kind of a remarkable comment.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Let me see, comment. Let me see. Someone asked if you're available for private calls. So I will just recommend again that you take a look at the chat section, everybody, and you'll see contact information by email for both of the presenters today, so you can reach out personally about that. We have, let me see, Rachel, who says, wondering how the presenters help with avoiding burnout while fundraisers juggle travel and increasing goals.
Well,
you want to take that?
Sure. I spent 20 years traveling the majority of the time, and now as a consultant, I pretty much do the same thing. It's about discipline. It is about what you do in the margins. The little things add up. When you are a traveling nonprofit administrator or a traveling fundraiser, it is how you spend the time that you have control of. You are on others' time a majority of your day, and the time, the part of your day that you can maintain control of is when are you going to sleep? When are you waking up? How is your routine in the margins? Your exercise? Are you establishing a canopy space in your hotel room? I never turn on a TV in a hotel room because I know there's precious little time throughout the distractions and the unexpected things that come up with travel to watch TV, and that can be a little extreme. We all need our downtime, but I know the routine that I need to stay accountable to who and what I need to. And so it's about developing a routine that works for you, but just think about the little, the 5 minutes here and the 10 minutes here, they add up into hours. And if you have a routine, stay disciplined to it. It can keep you energized and prepared, even on the road.
I think too, I'll add to that. There's a real opportunity for an honest appraisal of yourself, of oneself, when you're in that, and those of you that have been in burnout, you know what I'm talking about. It's a despondent, I'm not productive, I am so tired. So I think when you get to that place, one of the things to examine is your schedule. Like if you're traveling, are you giving what's growing? Are you taking on too much? Do you need to have a conversation with a colleague or a supervisor about how you're assembling your calendar and your time? And I think if you're in that burnout place, you must have those conversations. And if you're not in that burnout place, then you're managing it and functioning in it I think you have to really look at the granular pieces of your life. Like, it will start to stack up, like Scott has said. So the little things that start to edge you toward burnout. So just be really conscious of those. And then when and if they do start building up and you're finding yourself disengaging from your work, not wanting to travel, not wanting to talk with clients, then I think that's the point where you really have to dig a little deeper and look at what's motivating you to keep driving so hard, and ask for help around you.
Well, in fact, you were just then anticipating another question here. I think perhaps you've answered it from Elena, who did say, how can I communicate to my managers the importance of addressing burnout? How can I advocate for time and space in my own schedule? It sounds like you're saying not just to be aware, self-aware in this way that you've been describing, but also to learn to advocate.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is really tricky because we've all had bosses and supervisors that would not be so open to this topic and this conversation. I certainly have. I mean, there's a culture of overwork. Like, that's just the standard. And so I think there has to be a place in workplaces where we, and it may take a ton of courage and a ton of rehearsing and practicing and kind of figuring out what exactly am I asking for, but it is a huge amount of courage to go in and have these conversations. And then ultimately, if your needs aren't being met, then it's the difficult decision of, do I stay? Is this really, are these conditions in this workplace driving me toward a happy, fulfilled life, or is it driving me toward burnout? So I think that's really the honest question you have to ask.
Yeah, Shelley, I'd add, that's a great point. I'd just offer my perspective as someone who's been in the shoes before, in fundraising. I've had a conversation with a supervisor before that has gone something like, you and I both have the same thing in common, and that is that I am as successful in this role as I possibly can be. And because I know myself enough to know what I can do best and what I need in order to do my best work, I want to share with you how I'm feeling right now, physically, emotionally, or otherwise. And what I know is that fundraising is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And I can't run the 100-yard dash over and over and over and over and over again. I know myself, and I know what I can do and when I can do it best, but I know what I need in order to do that best. And that level of advocacy, fundraisers are sometimes we are the worst about advocating for ourselves and asking for things for ourselves. As good as we are at asking for money, asking for things for ourselves is something we suffer at. We have to get better at it.
Yeah.
And we are at the hour. And so I think we unfortunately have to close, but the other questions and comments have continued coming in. This is obviously something that's near and dear to all of us. We've experienced it personally. We fear it coming on. We see it in our colleagues, and you've given us a great way to begin this discussion and to really consider these things carefully and thoughtfully. And I do want to encourage everybody to, again, take the content from this in the slide deck that you can gain access to through our presenters, the recording that will be available to you at DonorSearch.net under the recorded videos area. And I'm going to just go ahead and take the liberty of reading these email addresses in case anyone had difficulty in seeing them. And they are simply Shelley, that's Shelley, at crouchandassociates.com, spelled out, Crouch, CROUCHAND, associates.com. So it's Shelley at crouchandassociates.com or Scott at crouchandassociates.com. But you can also find, of course, crouchandassociates.com right on the web. And once again, you can see the entire slide deck, including their contact data directly in the slides that you'll be able to receive from them and in the recording that will be posted to our site in just the next couple of days. So I want to thank you both again for taking on this topic and doing it with such great care and depth. And on behalf of everybody who is here, we really appreciate it.
Of course. hope it's helpful to everybody listening.
And I do want to welcome everybody to come back to the next session. We will be having yet another Flash class coming up next week. So please do take a look out to your email. Join us on the Facebook page. Look at the Twitter feed. You'll see sessions coming up, again, as early as next week in this series. So until next time, thanks, everybody.